Welcome to the Sound of Resistance channel. Russian leader Putin and Russian officials are looking for the formula to disperse the dark cloud over Ukraine. Ever since the Russian leader Putin entered Ukraine to invade, Russia has always been on the losing side. The Russian army occupied many Ukrainian cities, and even Russian leader Putin declared that he annexed 4 of the regions he occupied and recognized these regions as Russian lands. The Russian leader displayed a very sensitive attitude in the annexed regions of Ukraine. Putin threatened the whole world by saying that the Russian army would use all its means in the face of any attack or threat to the annexed regions. However, Ukrainian warriors ignore Putin's threat and continue to burn down the areas occupied by the Russian army. The Russian leader is waiting helplessly in the face of the attacks of the Ukrainian army. The attacks of the Ukrainian army continue to inflict deep wounds on the Russian army. Ukrainian warriors use state-of-the-art and modernized weapons to attack Russian soldiers. The Ukrainian army is getting stronger with the weapon support of NATO and the West. Putin's army has no chance against these weapons. Russian soldiers are experiencing great morale and psychological problems as a result of heavy losses in Ukraine. The fear of the death in the minds of the Russian soldiers does not go away for a moment. Russia is looking for alternative ways to regain its collapse in Ukraine. And the bad performance of the Russian army in Ukraine continues. The disintegration of the Russian army is only a matter of time. Russian officials seem ready to sit down with Ukraine by bowing their heads to put a stop to his bad trend. The last resort for Russia is to sit at the table with Ukraine. And with this development, the Ukrainian army seemed to have succeeded in bringing Russia to its knees. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said Russia is ready to listen to suggestions from Western partners to de-escalate tensions in Ukraine. Russia is willing to enter negotiations with its Western partners on Ukraine, the country's top diplomat said on Saturday. The Russian leadership, including President Vladimir Putin, is ready to negotiate on Ukraine, Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov told a local broadcaster. Russian Foreign Minister, although approaching Moscow with realistic proposals based on the principles of equality and respect for each other's interests and aimed at balancing the interests of all countries and finding concessions, Lavrov also said that Ukraine's delay in conducting negotiations with Russia will make it difficult for Kyiv to reach an agreement later, that negotiations would be possible. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov also included the attitude of the West in his statements. Lavrov has criticized the West for ignoring Putin's calls to stop hostilities in Ukraine and sit down for negotiations. In response to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's refusal to negotiate with the current Russian government, Lavrov said the events in Ukraine have become tragic for the West because of what is happening in this regime with absolute impunity. Increasing the criticism against Zelensky, the Russian minister said, Zelensky even signed a decree prohibiting from doing this. He is a comedy artist, but now there is no time for comedies. Russia's helplessness in Ukraine has been revealed all over the world. When the Russian army failed to gain the upper hand against the Ukrainian army at the front, it tried to negotiate with Ukraine. Ukraine continues to show that this effort of Russian leader Putin was in vain with the attacks it carried out in the south of the country. Ukraine does not want to sit at the table with Russia. The Ukrainians swore to fight until the Russian invaders were driven out of their country. The Russian commanders, who could not withstand the pressure of the Ukrainian warriors in the region, found a solution to escape. Officials appointed by Moscow reportedly left the city, joining tens of thousands of residents who had fled the other Russian-held areas before expected advance of Ukrainian forces. Ukrainian military officials said that as Kyiv forces fought to retake a province occupied earlier in the war, Russian troops transported large numbers of sick and wounded comrades from hospitals in the Kherson region in southern Ukraine. Kremlin officials in the Russian-occupied region urged civilians living in the region to leave the city of Kherson. The so-called evacuation of the occupiers from the temporarily occupied territory of the Kherson region, including medical institutions, continues. The General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine said in its morning update. In addition to the statements of the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, all equipment and medicines are being removed from Kherson, hospitals said. The practice of Russia against the health system in Kherson also drew the attention of the President of Ukraine, Zelensky. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said in a video speech Friday night that the Russians were dissolving the entire healthcare system in Kherson and other occupied areas. The occupiers have decided to close their health institutions in the cities, to take away the equipment, the ambulances, almost everything, Zelensky said. They are putting pressure on the doctors staying in the occupied areas to cross into Russian territory, he said. While the fire continued to burn in the south of Ukraine, active hours began to experience in the east of the country. Ukrainian officials said on Saturday that while Kyiv forces pursue gains in the south, Russia continues its bombing and missile strikes in the east of the country. 3 civilians were killed and 8 civilians were injured in the last 24 hours in the Donetsk region, which became a front line again after Russian soldiers tried to seize the city of Bakhmut. Russia's first target in eastern Ukraine is Bakhmut. For the Russian army, capturing Bakhmut will pave the way for Moscow forces to threaten Sloviansk and Kramatorsk, the 2 largest Ukrainian held cities in the long-warring Donbas region. In Ukraine, Donetsk and Luhansk make up Donbas. Pro-Russian separatists have controlled parts of both provinces since 2014. The region's Ukrainian governor said there was renewed activity in the northeastern Kharkiv region, where Russian troops withdrew last month and Ukrainian troops recaptured large areas of land. Ukrainian Governor Oleg Snehubov announced that Russian shelling in the northeastern Kharkiv region injured 3 civilians in one night. 2 women in their 40s and a 60-year-old man were wounded by Russian attacks near Kupiansk, a town that served as a supply hub for Russian forces in the region before Ukrainian troops regained control, Oleg Snehubov said. The army of Putin, who is hurting the south of Ukraine, is attacking everywhere in Ukraine without a plan. The governor of Ukraine's illegally annexed province said on Saturday Russian shelling had also hit critical infrastructure in the southern Zaporizhia region. Governor Alexander Staruk said the damage was being assessed. He did not specify what was hit and did not mention any casualties. About a quarter of the region, including the local capital, also called Zaporizhia in Ukraine, remains under Ukrainian military control. While Russia continues its attacks across Ukraine, the Ukrainian army carried out an attack in Crimea that made a lot of noise. This attack, which is thought to have been carried out in retaliation for the attacks of the Russian army in Ukraine, caused great damage in the Sevastopol Gulf. Russian authorities reported a drone attack on Sevastopol, the largest city on the peninsula that was annexed by Russia in 2014. Ships of the Black Sea Fleet are repelling a drone attack in the waters of Sevastopol Bay, said Mikhail Rezvosayev, the Russian-appointed governor of Sevastopol. Ukraine's chief of staff has claimed responsibility for a number of missile and drone strikes on Russian air bases in Crimea, including the attack that pierced a military facility last month. The Russian army has done their retreat at Kherson. The Russians are withdrawing military equipment from the Chernobyivka airport. The armed forces of the Russian Federation removed the absolute majority of military equipment from the territory of the Chernobyivka airfield. Almost all vehicles have been removed from the Chernobyivka airport. Chernobyivka is the airport located less than 10 kilometers from the center of Kherson. Kherson International Airport and the airport of the 11th Army Aviation Brigade of the Ground Forces of the Armed Forces of Ukraine are located on the territory of Chernobyivka. The Russian armed forces use the airspace to base army aviation. Ammunition depots for Russian troops on the right bank of the Dnieper River were also arranged here. The Ukrainian army has been systematically firing at Russian positions in Chernobyivka since March. In total, less than 5 helicopters were destroyed at the airport in Chernobyivka by the Ukrainian army attacks. The Ukrainian army seems to be very determined to send the Russian invaders out of their country. The Ukrainian army was able to take back many areas occupied by Russia from the Russian army. As the days progress in Ukraine, the end is drawing near for the Russian army. Thank you for watching us.